No, I forgot to hit the button, so I just did. But yeah, you can tell them to check again.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to go through today what this abstract is, and then we're going to practice taking some questions that you will give me. Because I think the biggest thing with this is that the posture and the attitude of this is one of engaging with ideas, critiquing ideas, and challenging people. It's really hard for some to take criticism and to take being questioned. This is a practice in humility and figuring out that you got to get thicker skin. None of the questions should come from a place of like attacking, but you're allowed to disagree with people. Does that make sense? Yeah. If disagreement comes from love, transformation, encouragement, and growth, is possible. If disagreement comes from a place of cynicism and frustration and hatred, then you're just being a bully. Any question that I give is not to make you feel stupid. That anyone gives does not make you feel stupid. It's to genuinely get you to think genuinely about whatever it is that you've come up with. All right? Whatever it is that you're trying to argue for. Because in this class, hopefully you felt this, is that we're about challenging ideas and coming to our own views, whether they're right or wrong. If they're right, great, we pursue them. If they're wrong, then we got to shift gears. So, I wanted to practice coming up with some questions today, but we'll do that in a little bit. So, behind me, your thesis, what is this called? Abstract. Should be 3 sections. I don't care if it's 3 paragraphs, it can be more than that, but it should be 3 sections. First section, your introduction, 2 to 4 sentences. No more than that. This is not a paper introduction, and it ends with your thesis. Please put your thesis in bold so that we can know what it is. No, go for it.
Are we going to give out a sheet like this?
So, I was going to explain this in a second, but you're right, I should explain this before. So each week that they're presenters, that Sunday of each week is when your abstract is due. It does not matter if you present on a Monday or you present on a Friday. It is due that Sunday. So that you can get it done with and not have to worry about it. Also, it's going to be an impossibility for you to turn it on Sunday and then change it. Because once you turn it in, I'm printing them immediately. Because I don't want to be printing every day. I'm not a math teacher. I don't have to do that. So I want to just get everything done on Monday. And so if you change it, we'll know it, and then that will be reflected in your grade, unfortunately. Because then we won't be on the same page as you, and so on and so forth. So it requires planning, right? And also it means you won't be able to like submit a blank Google document. Be like, yeah, I submitted it, and then like fill it in later. Because then I'll just print a blank Google doc and be like, why is this blank? So yes, I will print them off and then I will hand them out to you.
Okay.
Yeah. So first one, introduction. This is just 2 to 3 sentences of here's the problem, here's why it's so bad, here's my solution. That's it. Super easy. The body. The body of your argument should be, I said 14 to 17 sentences. That is weirdly specific. I know. Here's my thought behind it. Each of your 3 points that you had in your outline need to be in this. And you bold those sentences that are your main points. Everything else, like your argument for them, your trying to show why they're your points and how they build your argument in your abstract, whatever, that is regular. Please don't bold that. We want to know what your points are. But I think that each one of these should be roughly 5 sentences. So 15 sentences total for this. This is not a significant thing. It's not an extensive thing. It is significant, but it's not extensive. Then your application and conclusion. Why is your thesis so important, and what is it that you hope to fix? Why is your thesis so important? And what is it that you hope to fix? So this is the point at which you but you highlight your interdisciplinary issue and highlight how beauty is something that helps us to engage in the world for the sake of God, whatever that means. Great. That's your application and conclusion. 2 to 4 sentences, max. All of that should be under 2 to 2.5 minutes. Okay, are there any questions about any of this? Like literally anything revolving around presentations, the abstract, anything at all.
So we don't have our paper done like before the presentation?
No. You'll have your first point done, the writing sample, right? But you won't have your paper written. But you have your outline, so you have your main points. The goal of this is that through the questioning and answering, like portion of this presentation, that if there's something that is problematic or illogical or doesn't make sense, it'll get called out in the presentations, and you then have 2 weeks to fix it. So like if I presented today, got Q&A, I take notes, whatever, my paper will be due 2 weeks from today. So I've got 2 weeks now to make edits and to make my paper better. Does that make sense? So anyone who presents, your paper will be due 2 weeks out to the day, 14 days to the day after you present. Anyone who doesn't present, there's like a hard and fast due date, but it's on the writing process sheet. I can't remember exactly what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't have to have your paper written beforehand.
And so this isn't the end of year presentation. This is just like a precursor to that?
No, this is the end of your presentation.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
3 weeks?
Yeah.
3 weeks? Oh my. All right.
I mean, dude, after spring break, we only have 5 weeks of school.
Wow, that's crazy.
That's messed up.
So you basically have 8 weeks of school left.
Interesting.
So
It doesn't
Why said it was 3 months?
No, if you submit everything through phase 3 before March 12th, then you'll present.
Oh, okay.
If you don't, then you won't present. So yeah.
So it doesn't have to be like, it should obviously be pretty fleshed out and like understandable, but like it's not necessarily what our final paper, like exactly what it's going to talk about, because we'll get feedback and maybe change some things.
It should be pretty close to what your final paper is going to talk about. Because like you need to have an idea of what you're going and what you're saying and where you're going with your final paper.
Right. Okay.
But it doesn't, not like the the transitions and the like finer details, but big ideas, absolutely. Because if you come into a presentation and don't know what your third point is really doing in your argument, it's going to get obliterated. And I'm not being dramatic. I'm not trying to be mean, right? Like it will come out very quickly that like you don't know what you're talking about. Just because I've seen that happen in the past.
Yeah.
And it's not mean. Like no one is. There are people that are mean in these, but I facilitate all of the the presentations. And if someone attacks someone else, then I will not hesitate to shut it down. Like just to say, hey, let's stop there and then let's move on to another question, right? But it is a moment of realization to where if you did not put in the legwork, it'll show.
So for instance, not the wood like.
That's not wood, but okay.
It's wood part. But someone gets COVID and they're not able to present. Will they have to like a Zoom?
I haven't even thought about that. That is something I probably should think about.
It's not technically their fault, because especially with contact tracing.
It might be.
Oh, yikes.
I'm just being a jerk there. That was mean. I'm sorry. We'll figure out something. It'll probably have to be a Zoom, or we can just push it back and wait if there's space. It just depends. In this class, there might not be space because I've got essentially 3.5 weeks planned out of presentations, 4 per day. That's going to be roughly 15 to 16 presentations per class. So we'll see.
Wait.
If there are some, I'm not banking on, but right now it looks like there might be a few people to not present. And so if I hope that everyone does. I hope everyone can finish by the 12th. If so, then we'll extend it and we'll go to the end of the year with the presentations. I'm okay with that. But the trend is that in the past there have been roughly 50 to 60% of students who present. So, yeah. That's what I base the amount of time for the presentations on. Also makes it tricky because we're not doing the SRT presentation, so. Other questions? Yeah.
So do you have like a certain amount of like weeks like set out? Like what if like you plan on it taking like 3 weeks and it takes like 2 weeks? Do you just get like study halls for the third week?
I'll know that, no, I'll know that before spring break.
Okay.
And so I'll be able to plan accordingly. It will not be study halls. We'll do something cumulative at the end. Yeah. No, we will fill time. Yeah, never mind, yes.
So
Other questions?
our content is only gonna be 3 minutes long, pretty much? And then the
No.
rest of it is people asking.
The content that you are giving us is 2.5 minutes long, 2 to 2.5 minutes long. But then, it's like, so for every class, if I lecture for 30 minutes, 35 minutes on like a really high lecture day, right? I've got maybe a page that I lecture off of, but if someone asks a question or if a thought gets sparked, I've got about 4 other pages full of content that I can go to and like work off of. So I'm over-researched for the sake of presenting maybe 25% of what I have researched. That's what this is. So the questions, and you'll see this, right? But like the questions will have to dig into some of the points that maybe for the sake of like space have to be a little bit less, not as explained. So most of the questions can deal with, hey, can you define this term? Or, hey, can you expound on this idea? Or, what do you mean here, right? That type of stuff. Where everything else that you'll talk about in your paper, you can explain in the Q&A. This, though, is meant to be just a really concise summary.
So basically, we're giving this, and if during it we want to go on some sort of side tangent, we can, you're saying? Or you're saying during the Q&A, that's when our like side tangent, like Q&A stuff, like that's when it takes the most of your time?
This is something that you will just read off of.
Okay. Really?
Yeah.
But can you have like notes and stuff out there with you?
I would highly suggest having everything that you have used up to this point with you. Just in case. You can never be, there is no such thing as over-preparation for this. Firmly believe that. So yeah.
Okay, so you're up there presenting, right? And you do your presentation, and it goes to the Q&A, and you get asked like a question that like makes you think and you're not really sure about. Are you supposed to like act confident and stuff, like you know what you're talking about, or are you like allowed to say you don't know?
That's a really good question. I would prefer the former, not the latter, that you like act confident. But here's my response to that. I don't think that when people give questions that there is a single answer that you need to be able to give for every question, because the questions are going to be different. I got no clue, right? But I think that every question will need to be responded to. Trey, can you put your phone away? Thank you. That every question needs to be responded to. And what that means is that there are multiple different responses that we could have. But if you can take a question that you have no clue how to answer, anything like that, but then you can tie it back to your thesis, that's a good response. Like, I'll give an example before, like whenever I get into my abstract, that there was a question that one student gave earlier about like, well, what happens, so my abstract is about like the nature of an apple in conversation. And there was this question of a student that was like, well, what happens if, someone has like a significant trauma from apples and like can't eat, like, or can't be in the presence of apples being eaten? What do you do? It's like, well, that's kind of a strange question, but okay. You just respond to it, and you do your best to bring it back to your thesis based on your arguments. That's all you can do. If there's a question that is totally outside of the realm of your research, then I will say, hey, this doesn't really follow with like what you're trying to argue for, but could you try to give it a shot anyway? And that's basically my cue to you to say, hey, don't worry about like a grade or anything in this, just try to answer it the best of your ability. Yeah.
Are you allowed to have like a visual aid or something?
I mean, sure. I've never had one before, but yeah. It's not to say that they're bad. There's just never been a reason for one, but yeah, absolutely.
How do we get graded on that? Like, if you present it, you get a completion grade?
No. There's a rubric for the presentation. You can check that out on Canvas. Yeah, it's not a completion grade. No. I grade the presentations harder than I grade the paper. Because the paper is just a result of a presentation. The paper should be something that everyone gets B's and A's and B's on. But the presentation is like, it really shows me whether or not you know what you're talking about.
Is it like impossible to get a perfect score?
I've had one person in the last 5 years get a perfect score.
What? That's unfortunate.
Ethan Hurt. His presentation was unbelievable.
What is it about?
Destiny and hope. It was amazing. But yeah, that doesn't mean it's not possible, obviously.
So.
Here's the thing. This is what I say about Worldview all the time. I do not give a crap about the grade. I know that you guys do. I know that you have to. I get that. But the difficulty is with like caring about that is I've had very few, one person get an A. I have never had anyone fail. I don't even think I've ever had anyone get a D. In the presentation. In the presentation. No, in the class, yeah. But in the presentations, I don't think I've ever had I know that I've never had anyone fail. I don't know about D's. I'm not sure. Well, now with the D being 1.79, so probably not, yeah. But I don't think that you have to stress over that. I would concern yourself more with being able to know what it is that you're talking about and doing the best that you can, and then that's what you can go with. Other questions? These are great questions. Taking up all our time. Yeah.
So how are the questions, like how you answer questions graded? Or should I just look
The rubric
for that? Okay.
You can if you have any questions about the grading of the presentation, go to the rubric.
Okay.
All right, cool. Also, the week before we leave, I'm gonna do a presentation, like a real fake presentation, on a paper that I did in grad school, and I wrote an abstract for it and everything, and I will give to you. I actually have to cut the abstract down significantly, so there's that. Then I'll give you a copy of the rubric, and you'll get to grade my presentation. So you'll get to know, like, you'll get to see firsthand, like, what is really important and what's weighted heavier in the presentation.
Or like, are we talking like blazer and tie?
Doesn't have to be, no.
Sweatshirt type of thing?
I mean,
T-shirt and question mark?
whatever makes you comfortable.
Oh,
I'm not gonna
You
be
will,
like,
and I will.
I'm not like an English teacher like Wildman, like really enjoys like people dressing up during speeches. But that's like the nature of it. Like you should do that. What I care about more is like comfort. Like as long as you're comfortable up here. Okay, let's get to my presentation. Here's the abstract. I want you to listen to it. I want you to do one main thing. While you're listening to it, I want you to be like underlining different things, you know, whatever sticks out, take notes, things like that. At the end, I'm going to give you a minute or so to come up with one or two questions. So questions like you would give to me if this were a real presentation, okay? All right. Let me take a drink of water. My throat is now dry. All right, so this is my abstract on the apple in society. I studied the interaction between eating, conversation, and community. My research was mainly limited to contemporary theological texts that dealt with the theological meaning of food within a social context. I also read several articles that are all moving in a similar direction, recognizing the ill effects of food outside of ethics, social order, and aesthetics. However, there seemed to be a lack of recognizing the need for a casual snack that helped to create an atmosphere of levity and grace within a genuine and deepening dialogue. I concluded that the apple is the most social of all foods, promoting authentic community. First, I argue that the apple is the least offensive of all food snacks. It even has a welcoming appeal. The apple, when being consumed, is crisp. It lets you know that it's there. Has little spillage of its elements, and has the appropriate oral range for conversation. It fits any and all contexts, leveling any overly formal or familiar setting. Second, similar to a clean drink, coffee or tea, the apple is an aesthetic buffer. It creates comfort and opportunities to fill the entropy of conversation with renewed energy for thought and discussion. It provides the community with a natural orb for regular and symmetrical consumption. Like a good pair of shoes and distinct from other food or snacks, it goes largely unnoticed and creates a healthy atmosphere for deepening community without us being aware of its contribution. Finally, the apple is versatile. Accepted without prejudice or hesitation, it is simple, of many types, and easily disposable. It is ubiquitous and durable, therefore no one questions the existential necessity of the apple. It is not out of place in either a tropical or desert climate. All accept the quality without creating a barrier for community through pretension. My research on the social place of the apple did not consider cultural biases. It largely drew from observations made by Western theologians or of Jewish or Christian descent. I did not feel this was necessary since my position was mainly a response to the growing level of social discomfort in contemporary Western society. Even though this may limit the ontological qualities of the apple and the more fundamental role it may play in human life. This research is meant as a challenge to society rather than an exhaustive dissertation on the nature of the apple. So, write down one or two questions. Take a minute. All right. What questions do you have? I'm not going to answer these like in depth, but more just to show like what the question is getting at, but then also maybe try to answer them. Yeah, BJ.
We talked about a healthy apple. So like, would you do the same thing about if the apple was rotten?
That's a really good question. Or I would even go as far as to say, well, no, number one. I would even go as far as to say if it had like a brown spot on it, or if it was misshapen, not really the case. But yeah, I don't think that if the apple was rotten, I would want to eat it. I don't think it would promote that authentic community, right, that an apple should. Because probably whenever I took a bite, I would gag every time. So why would you eat that? Yeah, but I think that's a good question because it gets at what is the what are the limits of an apple? Even though, as the last sentence of this notes, it's not an exhaustive dissertation on the nature of the apple. It's about how the apple promotes conversation in a society that is reluctant to converse with people in a deep and significant way. I think that that's a fun question because then it gets into like, well, is the apple the best fruit, or what types of apple, right? Things like that. So yeah, that's good. What else? Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to know about ontological.
Like the being of it itself. So like, the ontological qualities of the apple is to say like what makes an apple an apple. So that's getting at what Brian was saying, or BJ was saying about like, if it's rotten, if it has a brown spot, whatever. I feel like I call you Brian or BJ like every other time I say your name. What do you go by?
Brian Keith.
I go by BJ now.
Okay. Alright, I'll call you BJ from now on. Yeah.
So, you said it largely goes unnoticed, and like creates a healthy atmosphere for deepening community. Is this like the way that it should be? Like, should it not be noticed as much? Like, does that help it create this atmosphere of like deepening interest in some way, or should the apple become more noticed in society?
So know that I'm not talking about it being noticed in society, but it's in the conversation. So I think there are two aspects of this, to the way I would respond to that. I'm not talking about like within a shared meal. Like in a meal, the food is usually the centerpiece to where everyone comes together around it. That's an important part. That's a whole different thesis, I think. What I'm talking about is if Olivia and I go to Starbucks and we're having a conversation one-on-one. If we go to you're having a conversation one-on-one. I'm not going to pull out like a lasagna and be like, hey, let's come around this meal. But if I'm trying to like show her that I am engaged with her, and like and I am all in on our conversation, and like there is like that deepening sense of community, the food, the apple, is something that becomes unnoticed even though it fills space that might be awkward. So like I talk about like if we're having a conversation and the conversation dulls for a little bit, or if someone is thinking about something, the apple can fill that space because we're uncomfortable with silence. So, speaking of the Pascal quote, because like a couple days ago in class, I don't think it was this class, but I like stopped to think about something and was just like, it was probably 15 seconds. After like 3 seconds, students are like, "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" Because that silence becomes deeply uncomfortable. An apple stays in the background, like it's something that is unnoticed, mostly, but also helps to fill that like gap, or fill that void. So that it promotes conversation because there is a lack of awkwardness because of the silence. But there's also something like, that's why I say it's the least offensive. There are foods that you eat that can be really offensive, that can fill that gap, but can be overwhelming. Like a violent sound, like pretzels. The worst conversational food. Or chips.
Aren't apples also a violent sound, though?
No. It depends on what type of apple you get and how you eat it. So yes, it could be. Like if my son is eating an apple in a conversation, I'm always like, oh my gosh, you just need to put that down for a second and let's have a conversation. Because it's like chomping and then like when he bites it, he chews it. But you can take a bite of an apple and it not be too big, and still chew it and like be like engaged with someone, and it not be something that is offensive and too overwhelming. Huh?
Teachers?
What?
When they eat apples. You can hear them smacking when they talk.
But see, that's the thing, is that like it's about how you eat an apple, so that might be another part of this that would be worth going into if I were presenting. Like the how people eat apples is really significant. Like there's an etiquette to it. But in a classroom, like if people are like if everyone's quiet and people are trying to work and someone pulls it out and like there's that crunch, that'll be offensive and that'll be like distracting. But if it's in a conversation between two people, that's a different context of it. So that's what we're talking about with this argument. It's not the apple is the best fruit, like the most welcoming fruit in all situations. It's just in a conversation with someone. Yeah.
So then, like, should you not eat it while you're talking? Is it just there to fill the silence? Or, like, are you eating it while you're in the middle of a conversation?
That's a really good question. So it does talk about it filling that entropy. That's my second point. My first point, though, is the apple, while being consumed, is crisp, letting you know it's there, has little spillage, and has the appropriate oral range for the conversation. So what that means is that you can take a bite, and you can chew it, and still be engaged, even while you're chewing it. Some people may find that offensive. That's understandable. Like if I take a bite out of an apple and I'm chewing it while I'm like listening to Olivia, that could be considered offensive. But in my mind, it is the least offensive fruit. Less offensive than like, if I were to pull out my phone and, oh yeah, totally. Okay, yeah. Or if I were to take out an orange and just start peeling it, right? Or if I were to take out like a Tupperware full of grapes and then like start poking them all, like, picking them off the stem and eating them. Those are more offensive. So I'm not trying to highlight that it is the only one, but it's the least offensive. There is still the possibility of someone being offended by someone chewing in front of you. If that's the case, then don't eat. Yeah, that's okay.
Would you say like the apple is more so like a comfort for someone who has anxiety about social conversations? Because like in some cases, like I see, like you said, like I wouldn't be comfortable with eating with like if they're not eating. Like that's kind of weird.
You just share, take a bite of the apple and then offer it.
Like just not randomly eating mid-conversation.
Yeah.
I understand the aesthetic part, I guess, like it being just like there to like fill space, but I don't know. I feel like you said before, it can be offensive to some, but it stands for comfort for like certain individuals who have like social anxiety.
I think it definitely could be because it's something that you are using to occupy like your physical body, like your space, so that mentally you can be present. I think that's absolutely a case for it.
And some people have like things they do, like Oliver always puts something like that. Not because he has anxiety, but because like
Yeah.
You don't know that. Maybe I'm really anxious right now.
Well, that's a possibility. But I get what you're saying because people like fidget a lot, or like don't know what to do with their hands, things like that. It could be that. I think that's a different paper though. Like that's a different thesis than mine.
I just thought because like the comfort aspect of your argument of it being, I guess, filling.
Well, so the point of the comfort is that if there is silence between Olivia and I in a conversation, the apple can fill that, and it ease that like awkwardness of just.
Well, how is it doing that? By just eating, unless you eat it?
Yeah. Well, by eating it, the crisp sound, like it takes up that like void, like it helps to fill that empty space. But it also helps to promote that conversation. It's like taking a drink of coffee. If we're on a lull or like if there is silence or something, I take a sip of coffee as I'm like thinking like, okay. Yeah. And then like it promotes the conversation in that sense. Not literally promoting it, like the apple doesn't give you thoughts, but it takes up that space to where you're not concerned with the discomfort and the awkwardness, but you're concerned with actually engaging with what the other person is saying. So that's why I said it promotes. It doesn't create authentic community, but it promotes it. Yes. Which then promotes the idea that I can be engaged with Olivia and not have to worry about my own anxiety or discomfort with silence. Because like if you think about it, as humans, we are a deeply like anxious people and we don't like silence. Like that would be my main point in this. We don't like being silent in front of another person, let alone a crowd. Well, a crowd, but like let alone another person. And so the apple then becomes a way of like filling that gap. And by filling that gap, you can then promote any sort of like true and real engagement and conversation with another person. It's not fully thought through or fleshed out because I wrote this last night, but yeah. Yeah, Gabe.
So oddly enough, I actually kind of understood what you're saying about the apple.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you were to encounter a psychopath who's eating a green apple, not the sliced apples, but like a round green apple? Does that change your thesis?
So that gets to the heart of like the type of apple. I think that it doesn't change my thesis, it actually proves my thesis. because there is a type of apple that you have to have. If you eat a green apple, it's always so bitter and tart, and like it actually disrupts conversation and like that communion. If you eat a red delicious apple, it's like chewing cud, like a cow chewing cud. Like it's so sandy and it disintegrates. Red delicious apples are like the the throwaway apple. They're just the grossest. But if you eat like a pink lady apple, a Honeycrisp apple, I think that those are two types of apples where they're not overly juicy to where when you bite into it, it doesn't like have juice dripping down your face or down your hand. It's just crisp enough to where it's not like a Braeburn apple to where you're biting into a brick. But it has this perfect blend. So I think that the type of apple does matter. Only for the sake of it promoting this conversation in this community rather than it necessarily like detracting
So
from it.
like sliced apples too, would that change it up a little bit?
I think sliced apples would, yeah. I think that is actually applicable. I think that the only thing that the only big, there are two big issues with this thesis that I came up with last night. One is sliced apples, I think would be a better option. Two is the core of the apple.
What?
That is, if I was having let's be honest. If I was having a conversation with someone and they just finished the apple and I was thinking, oh, let's put it down, and they just flipped it and started like chomping on the core, that would be offensive.
I would be
So,
offended.
I think that those are like the flies in the ointments of my thesis. But, you know, it's also just a fake thesis, so whatever, it's fine. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, hold on. Can we get Garrett behind you? And then you.
Among other things, you identified the apple's role in society as an orb for symmetrical consumption.
What?
Could you explain the meaning and significance of that phrase?
That's a good question. That is much more about the aesthetic quality of it. So this goes back to what VJ's question was. If it was, you know, if it was rotten or if it's misshapen, I think that there is an intensity with which, if you were passionate about fruit and apples, then you could say it needs to be a perfect sphere. If it's misshapen, then I don't want it. I think there's beauty in like a misshapen apple that you can eat it and it can still promote that conversation. So that's what I mean by the community with a natural orb for regular and symmetrical consumption. Is that I think that there is something to like the aesthetic quality of the apple and the shape of it itself.
So like literally symmetry.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
What is the last one?
you said that this was mostly from like Western theologians of Jewish or Christian descent. Do you think that the best way to like promote community would change if it was like someone that was not of Christian or Jewish descent, or from like a different culture where apples might not be like as common of food as they are in America?
That's a really great question. So if you look at my third paragraph, the very first sentence, my research on the social place of the apples did not consider cultural biases. I didn't research that. So I think that it does, absolutely, because if there are places where apples are not found, it would be strange. It would be like if you ate a star fruit.
Bro, those are so pretty though.
Well, but they're not like local. They're not something that is ubiquitous. They're not something that is like every day. Or if you ate like a dragon fruit, right? Like just pull out a dragon fruit and start chopping it and like eating it. Like that would be weird because I would immediately think, where did you get that? And it cuts off conversation. So I think that, yeah, that does play into it. But to what extent, I'm not sure. All right, so here's the thing. There are two things that I want to observe. Number one is that I answered every question. You should be able to, I don't care about that. You should be able to do that. Number two, a lot of, I would say roughly 75% of your questions started with "you said." That is a confrontational, even though it wasn't meant in that way, that could be considered a very confrontational way of asking a question, right? Because then the assumption is, well, you said this, but I think this. That's the assumption there. I don't want to say find a better way to ask a question, but find a different wording. Like, you could say something along the lines of, in your second paragraph, could you expound on this sentence? What do you mean by that? And then that starts a conversation. Rather than immediately putting the presenter, him or her, on the defense. Okay? Those are my only two things I noticed. Yeah.
Wait, so after you do this, you don't go, wait, so after you do this, you ask questions, so you don't present right away? Like,
This is your presentation, is you take questions and then you answer them. All right, so hey guys, really quickly, the final project. If you do not do this presentation, what takes the place of that is the final project. That will be this. We have our 15 of life's universal questions. So take the first one, for example, knowledge, what is my experience? Your job, if you do the final project, if you don't present it and have to do the final project, will be to take each of those 15 questions and give a single statement, literally a sentence, of belief about each of those. Then, for each one of your statements, provide 100 to 150 words explaining how you got to that statement of faith. Like arguing for that statement of faith, essentially. So it will be roughly another like 6 to 8, 7 to 9 page paper. Not research oriented, but I think that you'll have to use notes for some of it, like our class notes. But that is equivalent to a worldview presentation. Okay? So, those are the two things. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, we'll see you tomorrow for Destiny. Yeah. It's like a statement of belief, essentially.
So then, if you talk to the board or what have you, I'm going to run outside. So then,
Nothing, it's just coffee is a liquid, it's a drink. And so my point is to talk about all food. I would always prefer coffee or tea. But if I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat, and what's the best thing you can eat? Like that's my point. That's like the point of the eating.
Crazy, yes.
Well, no, but this is to show like how fun it can be, even if we're talking about the duality of man, if we're talking about beauty, like these types of questions can come up in every single one.
I'm not going to tomorrow or possibly Friday.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's very fun.
You have to get them all cut out, or just pulled? Like, are they impacted?
I don't know.
You have to go to an oral surgeon. Really?
I don't know.
Hey. All right. If you're going to be out for that long, they're probably all impacted. All four of mine were impacted, and I had to get them removed through oral surgery.
What are the other options? They pull them?
Yeah, if they're already, like, if they're pushed through, then they just pull them.
Yeah, they are pushed through.
Okay, that's fine. The notes will be on campus.
So I'll do
Yeah. Plan on getting meetings done now.
Okay.
We ran like 10 times for like 4 meters.
That's
So
okay.
like we ran 40 meters and then walked back and then ran 40 back. And then we did 8 times for 50, 6 times for 60, 2 times.
That's unfortunate.
And then we did a warm up and cool down.
Your class isn't that bad.
What?
Never mind. I thought she said something about that.
No.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
You can stay there and watch. Yesterday.
Oh, why?
Yeah, because there's like a distance code, like a sprinting code, and like, so there's like, yesterday he was making snowballs and chucking them into the woods and at the light pole.
So I never got an email from your mom, assuming it kind of got water under the bridge.
Yeah,
I was like, all the teachers were like coming out to like get in their cars and stuff, so you just feel like really fast, and you just feel like right.
Said it was fine. Absolutely. Like, whatever. You just understand where I'm coming from, right?
No,
Oh, yeah.
so
Yeah, that I was afraid of Christian school to recommend an arbitrary. And I was like, okay, so.
No, that's true. I would never recommend a movie with sex in it. The language and violence, I don't know. Maybe I should care.
I feel like we have a bunch volleyball.
But yeah,
Like, no,
it's alright. I get it. I definitely get what you're saying.
Yeah.
They're all gonna be gone.
Not everyone can take faith in art and understand, you know,
Yeah, she's coaching.
that some things are gratuitous, even though they might be deemed
Or
sinful.
something, or a baby coach or something. Yeah.
I bet they would not very bad at explaining.
Oh, yes. One of them played my sister.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not
She's still playing.
the orator my dad is. So I can like understand these things and be like, ooh, yes, that is very good.
I
But
love the
then when I try to
Christmas
like
cards. Those are fun.
explain it to somebody else or defend it or something, I'm just like,
I am. I
I
can.
don't
I will.
And so it's probably better.
No, it's okay.
Oh.
It's alright.
Remember?
For
Monday.
some reason I thought class ended at 25.
Monday.
You good, Bree?
I have heartburn.
I have to
get tested for COVID. Because I was heartburn. And I was like, I don't think I do. I went down her house last night though, and I came back
It came back that quickly.
Rapid tests come back in like 8 hours or something crazy. So I went and got tested with work and I got
You're trying to trick me and all
I didn't know heartburn was a symptom.
It's not. It's literally not. It's just, I guess being on the safer side, whatever,
But
but.
it's not a symptom. That's not safe. That's just being wasting time.
Yeah. Yeah. She even said it's probably a waste of time, and I was like, then why are you making me do it? So annoying.
Did she at least give you a Tums?
Yeah, she gave me 2 Tums and sent me on my way, and then pulled me out of class to tell me. Like 5 minutes later, she pulled me out of class. She's like, I want you to get tested. I was like,
That's weird.
heartburn, man.
Sorry.
That's
But
it.
you didn't vomit on a train after eating the Tums?
Oh. Don't remind me, dude. I still literally have nightmares about it. So, okay, I have like a deathly fear of vomit. Like, you know how some people will like have a severe panic attack when they're on like a high bridge or something? I'm like that with vomit. See,